Hi, I'm Gina Drace. I'm a senior in computer science, and like was mentioned, I created a video game called The Great Escape. I almost minored in art, so this project gave me an opportunity to use my creativity in addition to my computer science background. So the first step was to make a physical prototype, and this is kind of unusual for a whole video game. So I wanted to share some pictures because this was my first step in actually designing the virtual environment for the first level of the game. So that prototype eventually turned into this. I spent a lot of time on this level because I really wanted to create a fun and playful environment. Since the player is a toy car, I wanted them to really be immersed in this kid's room world for the start of the game. So the task of collecting blocks is not that difficult, but I wanted the player to take the time to explore the environment and get used to the perspective of the toy car. If it is knocked down, the sound triggers someone walking into the room, and when the person walks in, they leave the door open, so the player is allowed to make their escape. And this time, sorry for that kind of loud sound, they're successful and they broke through the door. And then we're brought to this ending scene that's pretty similar to the starting scene. But, it's later in the day, sunset, to create the illusion that some time has passed since the start of the game.
So hi, my name is Teresa, and I'm a researcher at Murphy Lab UIC, and my capstone was done with the support of Brian Murphy and Jung-Ho Lee. My capstone project is titled Drug Discovery, Structural Elucidation Using Nuclear Magnetic Resonance Spectroscopy. I understand that is a lot to take in at first, but we are going to break it down into 3 parts: drug discovery, structural elucidation, and nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. And with that, let's begin. Drug discovery is a process of identifying new prospective medicine, where a majority are isolated from nature. In the last 30 years, 50% of approved drugs have been isolated from natural product. In this figure, which is a pie chart of all small molecule approved drugs in the last 40 years, you can see that more than half of the drugs are from natural product or are mimicking a natural product. So with knowing that a lot of drugs come from natural products, this leads us into structural elucidation. Structural elucidation is a part of the natural product drug discovery process, and natural products come from all around us. But it's hard to look at, a sponge and know exactly how many carbons, how many hydrogens, how many oxygens it's made of, and how those are connected. And so the main problem here is that the structure of these natural products are unknown, and we need to elucidate them. To help me further explain why obtaining these structures is important, let's take a look at penicillin.
So my project is on a field of mathematics called Galois theory, and this is pretty theoretical math coming up, so I apologize for that ahead of time. In order to get to Galois theory, we start off by asking questions about polynomials. And polynomials are very important to mathematics because approximation via polynomials is a rich subject of study, and there are higher algebraic fields of math that require this sort of concrete knowledge. What I mean by a polynomial is this. It is a finite sum of terms. Some of the factors are variables, and we say that this polynomial is defined over a field if all of the A terms are in that field.
I have a general question. So your last statement was that it's an extremely rich and versatile theory. So what other things can it do that you would find really interesting?
So I was like, last night I was dreaming that someone would ask this question. And it's kind of hard to appreciate how much Galois theory can do unless you're like pretty deep into math or applied math or something like that. But for example, I'm interested in number theory. It's virtually impossible to do the kind of number theory I'm doing, even as an undergrad at this point, without Galois theory. You could do it, but it wouldn't be nearly as interesting, probably. The other thing that you can apply it to that's really nice is it's extremely important for understanding stuff like elliptical curve cryptography from the ground up. You might not need it as like a CS person doing it, but if you want to understand the theory, the full generality, you must understand Galois theory.
So welcome everyone to our presentation on student self-efficacy in calculus classes, where we're going to be comparing the results of two surveys that we conducted in fall 2019 and in fall 2020. So of course, before the pandemic, the focus of our research in fall of 2019 was to look at active learning and its effect on student confidence. However, because of the pandemic, the environment in which students were, which affects their active learning, completely changed. So the focus of our question changed, even though we still administered the fall 2020 survey. So now we're asking, how do the students score on the mathematics self-efficacy survey between the different learning environments of fall 2019 and fall 2020? So we were focused on the gender differences that came out and the ethnic differences that we could see between fall 2019 and fall 2020 and the completely different environments that students were in. So the sampling strategy was we conducted this research at an urban Midwestern university, that's a Research One university. We sampled students from a lot of different calculus classes, but this presentation is focusing on Calculus 1 and Calculus 2. And the different settings that we see here are, before the pandemic started in fall 2019, students were in a classroom that allowed for collaboration between students. Students worked together.
So my name is Midhan. I work for Shimamura Laboratory. I'm going to present the impact of a CRISPR-Cas9 mediated knockdown of CXCR7 in non-small cell lung carcinoma. So approximately 80% of lung cancers fall within the category of non-small cell lung carcinoma, and a significant portion of these tumors express mutations for what's called epidermal growth factor receptor, or EGFR. Now, EGFR mutations result in uncontrolled cell growth and proliferation, typical of cancer cells, but clinically are treatable with EGFR tyrosine kinase inhibitors, which we call TKIs, such as gefitinib or osimertinib. So just to kind of illustrate what's going on here, we have our cell, and when EGFR binds to its ligand, it activates a host of pathways that lead to cell growth and proliferation. But when EGFR is mutated, these pathways are always on. It's constitutively active, leading to cell overgrowth and proliferation. So as I mentioned, we can treat the mutant EGFR with a TKI, shut it down, and turn those pathways off, stopping that cell overgrowth. But we see after some time that another receptor in the cell called CXCR7 begins to be overexpressed and is able to turn back on the MAP kinase pathway, leading to cell overgrowth and proliferation once again. And I also mentioned we see that epithelial to mesenchymal transition with the phenotype of these cells as well, seemingly aiding in their drug resistance.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Olivia Lee, as Julio introduced me, and I will be presenting about community gardening in Englewood and what it tells us about the meaning of well-being. Just so you know, this project was done as a part of the Cultivating Wellbeing project led by Dr. Monty Dillon and the Anthropology Department. So this table was taken from Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and it shows the stark contrast between Englewood and the rest of the city. So in Englewood, its median household income is 2.5 times lower than the city average. Only 7% of its people have bachelor's degrees or higher, and 35% of the housing units are vacant. And community gardens that exist today are made to be, as this gardener says, communal places where people feel loved, safe, respected, accepted, and free to be themselves. Sometimes community gardens are literally in the middle of deteriorating landscape. So in the first photo, the house to the right has been abandoned for many, many years, and the garden leader hasn't been able to track who was responsible for it, so it has been sitting there for a while. And then the red building to the left is an elementary school that was permanently closed, but then the garden is between them. And there's a lot of vegetables that are being produced and distributed among the community members.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Today I'll be presenting on racial and ethnic trends within the geosciences at UIC. And this is really specific to me and special to me, just because as a Black woman in STEM who's like transferred from a biology major to an EAS major, it's just something that I've seen a lot in the experience. So this research is very hands-on, but also specific to my experiences as well. Yeah, that's basically what sparked this research in the first place, just kind of experiencing that firsthand of seeing kind of like a lack of diversity, not just specifically for Black women as myself, but just in general. So as you can see, the STEM graduate level, like degrees versus like bachelor's degrees, you can see there's a difference between how that's distributed between minority groups. And STEM as a whole has been making really great progress in distributing that more evenly, but you can still see that there's a gap between some racial groups such as white and Asian American compared to more underrepresented groups like Black, Hispanic, and Native American. And compared to other STEM sciences, the geosciences also tends to fall behind by a lot actually, but they're still making that same like consistent growth. It's just that compared to other STEM sciences, they do fall behind by at least a few percentages. And compared to the US population as well, there is a gap between those underrepresented groups that are represented through like STEM bachelor's degrees versus the population as a whole.
I'll start by introducing my topic by saying the phrase, boys will be boys. This phrase has been used to excuse the behavior of men for thousands of years, and although this phrase seems like a way of saying that boys are the more rambunctious gender, the phrase has a contrasting connotation that makes a once playful statement into a justification for the undesirable persona a man takes on in the household where man is king. The man of the house mentality has been relevant since society became civilized, and by studying the genres of Roman comedy and the traditional Mexican telenovela, it is possible to substantiate the similarities between men of ancient Rome and Mexican men through their respective archives in these genres. So, how do male figures appear in scripted works? Well, in Roman comedy, the paterfamilias, the most respected man of the household, and his family is the brunt of all jokes. In telenovelas, the male characters are represented in a way that male audience members wish society would see them. They're flawless, handsome, and heroic characters who the audience is meant to root for. The treatment they receive is proportional to the real-life difficulty of his job as well. For example, someone who is a hard-working farmer might be the star of the telenovela because he has the hardest job and he should be treated as the hero of the story. While the Senex character of a Roman comedy lays all of its flaws out on the table, the telenovela man hides his flaws behind layers. When stripped of these layers, it becomes evident that these character types are more similar than they seem. Both characters demonstrate an entitlement towards other characters that reinforce their positions of privilege within the family unit.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. I am sitting here modestly asking for only your ear. My name is Casina, and you may find it a little strange that I'm sitting here talking to all of you like this, but I promise, I am doing it for a good reason. And on this stage, you'll find that my words are minimal compared to those around me.
I'm Abigail Olson. I am a junior neuroscience major, and my research consists of learning about how medical marijuana influences the learning and memory in naked mole rats, and also how it reduces inflammatory pain in naked mole rats. I found out about this research through Dr. Thomas Park, who happened to be my honors faculty fellow. I went into his office last spring semester, so spring semester 2018, and I asked him just to sign off on my completion forms, and at that time I became interested in doing research. And so I happened to ask him if he had any openings, and he did, and so here I am. He asked me about my research interests and asked me about my GPA, and then he said that one of his graduate students, Bridget, had an opening in a couple of her tests that she was doing. He connected us through email, and then we met a couple of days later to talk in detail about what she's doing. My main focus is the testing with the medical marijuana on inflammatory pain, and when the most efficient time to take medical marijuana to optimize this pain relief. I also do the learning and memory test with marijuana in general. So we're testing to see how marijuana influences learning and memory in adolescent naked mole rats. So when I first arrived at the animal facility, I put on PPE so we can protect the naked mole rats from our outside environment. It includes putting on a lab coat and a mask and gloves and shoe coverings so we can keep the animal facility very clean. And then go into the naked mole rat room and grab the cage that I need for the day, and go across the hall to the maze room and set up the mazes that we're doing that day and run the mazes. So everybody who works with animals needs to be approved by the BRL, the Biologic Resources Laboratory. We need to get online training for that, obtain a certificate, and we meet with the veterinarian one-on-one in the actual animal facility where we get a general tour of all of the rooms. And then how I got acclimated to actually working with the naked mole rats, I would meet the graduate student Bridget a couple of times a week, and we would go into the naked mole rat room where we would practice handling the naked mole rats, transporting them, and things like that. So in the lab there are 8 undergraduates. We have one of the highest numbers of undergraduate students doing research on this side of campus. There are 2 graduate students, and I work with Dr. Park mostly when he suggests that I apply for a certain grant for the research lab, and I talk to the graduate student who I personally work under, Bridget, and she lets me know what testing I'm doing each day and kind of the general timeline of this semester. So I'm pre-health, I'm pre-med, and medical marijuana is one of the hottest topics today, and it's really interesting that it's being prescribed at the rate that it is, but we really don't know a lot about how medical marijuana actually works. So I feel like getting this research while I'm an undergrad will really shape my perspectives and my viewpoints on medical marijuana when I actually become a physician. And so I will know better about how it works and hopefully actually contribute to the research. So before I talked to Dr. Park, I actually emailed another professor on campus about his research. And even though there wasn't room in his lab, the way I went about it, he gave me a lot of advice as to how and who to contact in the future. So the previous semester, I went up to him after one of our classes and told him about my interest and compliment his teaching style and whatnot. So I wanted to make sure that he would know who I was. So because I had planned to email him about doing research in his lab. So when I emailed him, I kind of reminded him about who I was. I was the student that stayed after class yesterday or whatever day it was, and I was interested in doing research. And he was very nice about it. He explained that, again, he didn't have room in his lab, but he told me basically step by step on how to approach other professors and hopefully getting a better outcome. And he gave me a list of actually people who I could contact. So I think it's the way that you go about asking for research really plays a big part. Since I had my research success talking to Dr. Park, I definitely recommend to really get to know their honors faculty fellow, just in case they also have an opening in their lab, like what happened with me. So really getting to have that good relationship would be very helpful. Also, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, even though sometimes rejection may happen. There's most likely a positive experience right around the corner, and it will lead, that rejection will lead you to that. Don't feel like you have to have all of your interests planned out and know exactly what you want to do, because most of the time as a sophomore in college, you really don't know what you're interested in until you are actually involved. So don't be afraid to go out of your comfort zone, talking to professors that you normally wouldn't talk to, or being involved in a research project that you didn't think that you would have interest in, because most likely you will find your passion through this route. And I'm sitting here telling you that that's what happened to me, and I'm very happy with where I am. So I'm happy that I went out of my way and saying, maybe Naked Mole Rats will be fun, maybe not, but I'm definitely enjoying my research. I just want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Park and Bridget for being awesome mentors, and I actually was able to obtain 2 grants this semester for the lab, and I know that wouldn't be at all possible without their help and support. So thank you guys. Can I redo that? Yeah.